Now, the greatest radio shows of all time.
Suspense.
The Shadow Node.
Washington calling David Harding, Counter Spy.
Classic radio theater.
The Great Gildersleeve.
Fibber McGee and Molly.
Dragnet. Gunsmoke.
The Lone Ranger.
Now, step back into a time machine with your host, Wyatt Cox.
Good evening, friends of the Inner Sanctum.
We go back 73 years this Friday to February 17th, 1950, an episode of The Halls of Ivy starring Ronald and Benita Coleman. Benita-Hume was her maiden name and the name she used in a lot of her acting. And it's a story about a Chinese student that experienced discrimination. And we thank you for tuning in. On this Friday, this is the 17th day of February. This is the 48th day of the year, 317 days until we get to 2024. Miles Standish appointed as the first commander of the Plymouth colony on this date in 1621. In 1801, an electoral tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr resolved when Jefferson was elected president and Burr vice president by the House of Representatives. The first ship passed through the Suez Canal on this date in 1867. In 1924, Johnny Weissmuller set a new world record in the 100-yard freestyle swimming competition with a time of 52 2/5 seconds. Of course, Weissmuller would go on to fame as Tarzan in the motion pictures. Now, in 1925, Harold Ross and Jane Grant founded the New Yorker magazine, the debut issue dated February 21st, 1925. In 1935, make that 33, the magazine Newsweek published for the first time. In 1936, The Phantom, the first superhero, made his appearance in comics. Pope Pius XII, on this date in 1958, declared St. Clare of Assisi the patron saint of television. In 1964, in Westbury versus Sanders, the Supreme Court ruled that congressional districts had to be approximately equal in population. The Ranger 8 probe launched its mission on this date in 1965 to photograph a region of the moon in preparation for the manned Apollo missions. The Sea of Tranquility would become the site chosen for the Apollo 11 lunar landing. In 1966, Army Chief of Staff General Harold K. Johnson, upon learning that Cassius Clay, later known as Muhammad Ali, was up for the Vietnam draft, offered Clay to the Marines.
Well, you know that two people draw on the draft, the Army and the Marines, and I'm prepared to offer up Cassius Clay to the Marines.
Cassius Clay, who would change his name to Muhammad Ali, claimed he was a conscientious objector, and he never served in either the Army or the Marines. 1972, President Nixon left for his historic trip to mainland China. Before his departure, Nixon talked of the future with mainland China.
As we look to the future, we must recognize that the government of the People's Republic of China and the government of the United States have had great differences. We will have differences in the future. But what we must do is to find a way to see that we can have differences without being enemies in war.
The relationship was not one that was good for the United States. 1972 sales of the Volkswagen Beetle model exceeded those of the Ford Model T. And in 1974, Robert K. Preston, a disgruntled Army private, buzzed the White House with a stolen helicopter in 1974. A court in Milwaukee on this date in 1992 sentenced serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer to life in prison.
I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, mother. I hate you. Jeffrey's out of control.
I feel so bad for what I did to those poor families, and I understand their rightful hate. Oh, I will be in prison for the rest of my life. I know that I will have to turn to God to help me get through each day. I should have stayed with God. I tried and failed and created a Holocaust. Thank God there will be no more harm that I can do.
Prophetic words as Dahmer was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution, in November of 1994. In Philadelphia on this date in 1996, world champion Garry Kasparov beat the Deep Blue supercomputer in a chess match. Passing away on this date in history, jazz pianist Thelonious Monk, also Irish actor Dan O'Herlihy, the Cowsills, Bill Cowsill, pro wrestler Mike Awesome, country singer Mindy McCready, and Rush Limbaugh. This is the birth date of department store founder Aaron Montgomery Ward. Also baseball announcer Red Barber, singer Tommy Edwards, It's All in the Game. The president's daughter, Margaret Truman, born on this date. He's probably best known for his one-man Mark Twain show. Hal Holbrook, born on this date. The man who sang about tossin' and turnin'. Bobby Lewis, born on this date. Actress and beauty queen Marianne Mobley. Also singer Gene Pitney, who sang about the town without pity. And basketball's Rick Majerus, all born on this date in history. She was in A Guiding Light and Another World. She won 5 Emmys on St. Elsewhere and another Emmy for Friends. Christina Pickles, 88 years old today. The man who invented the electric banjo and now performs regularly in Branson, Missouri. Buck Trent, 85 years old today. The lady who sang about pink shoelaces, Dodie Stevens, 77. The beautiful Renee Russo, 69. He was in Home Improvement, and he also hosted Family Feud for a season. Richard Karn, 67. Actor Lou Diamond Phillips is 61. Michael Jordan, 60 years old today. Who's in the exact same age as Larry the Cable Guy. And I know who I would rather have on the show, although I know who I would rather have coaching a basketball team. Denise Richards is 52 today. The founder of Green Day, Billy Joe Armstrong, is 51. From Sliders and Crossing Jordan, Jerry O'Connell, 49. Country singer Brian White is 49. From Nip Tuck, Kelly Carlson is 47. John Ritter's son, Jason Ritter, from Joan of Arcadia, 43 years old today is Jason Ritter. From Third Rock from the Sun, Joseph Gordon-Levitt is 42. He's done a lot more since that show, but he's still best known for that. Paris Hilton is 42. Actress Ann Curtis is 38. From Glee, Cord Overstreet is 34. Ginny Weasley in the Harry Potter movies, Bonnie Wright, is 32. Singer-songwriter Ed Sheeran, 32. And from Pretty Little Liars, Sasha Patrici. I was so worried about pronouncing that last name that I screwed up Sasha. Sasha Patrici is 27. Those some of the people celebrating the 17th day of February is their birthday. And if this is your birthday...
Hi, we're the 4 freshmen, and we just want to say, Happy birthday to you!
And from 73 years ago today, February 17th, 1950, Ronald and Benita Coleman, The Halls of Ivy. That's up next on this Friday Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite radio station. The Colemans had outstanding dramatic credits in the motion pictures and in radio, but they were not thought of as comedians. That changed when Ronald and Benita Coleman, during the 40s, appeared as Jack Benny's neighbors on The Jack Benny Show, and they actually revealed quite the flair for comedy. So when Don Quinn, the co-creator of Fibber, McGee, and Molly, came up with the program The Halls of Ivy, they were not the first choice, but they became the final choice, and they did a wonderful job. The show ran for a little over 2 years on radio. It ran on NBC. It ran for 1 season on CBS television. Ronald and Benita Coleman, The Halls of Ivy, this episode, and while it was basically a comedy show, they did not shy away from dealing with serious subjects, as they do in this episode of Prejudice. And prejudice was profound, particularly against those from the Far East. Japanese, Chinese people were all still soundly discriminated against. Of course, African Americans as well, severely discriminated against. But this shines a light on a brilliant Chinese student who leaves Ivy because of intolerance. From February 17th, 1950, The Halls of Ivy, here on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, presents The Halls of Ivy, starring Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Coleman.
I was curious. I tasted it. Now I know why Schlitz is the beer that made Milwaukee famous.
If you like good beer, you'll find it pays to be curious and learn about Schlitz for yourself. And now, The Halls of Ivy.
The halls of ivy that surround us here today, and we will not forget though we be far, far away.
Welcome again to Ivy, the College of Ivy and the town of Ivy, USA. Dr. William Todd Hunter Hall, like any other college president or almost any kind of executive, has to make certain concessions to his superior officers. For instance, he must on occasion have lunch with some of the members of the Board of Governors when he would far prefer to spend that hour and a half playing a game of chess with his wife, Victoria, who was, until her marriage, the toast of the English musical comedy stage. With chess at the halls, it doesn't matter much who wins, but a college president must not permit himself to be checkmated too many times by his Board of Governors, even at a luncheon at the faculty club like this one.
Enjoy your lunch, Doctor?
Very much, Mr. Merriweather, very much. I've also enjoyed the opportunity to discuss these matters with the board members present, and to have the... Oh, pardon me, Mr. Wellman, but that is my milk you're drinking.
Oh, it is? Oh, I'm sorry, Doctor. Thoughtless of me. I thought I had ordered milk myself. You did, Clarence, and drank that, too. You also ate my strawberries. If you lunch with us often, Dr. Hall, you'll learn to keep an eye on Clarence. The man's a gastronomic kleptomaniac. Order something he likes, and he swoops down on it like a vulture.
Don't be silly, Merriweather. I'm simply a trifle absent-minded. So much on my mind.
If there's anything disturbing you that we haven't talked about, Mr. Wellman, you know, anything I can help with, by all means, let's have it.
Ah, that's the spirit, Doctor. Relieve his mind and protect your lunch. Yes. Well, Clarence, what's your trouble? Weak track team this year? Or did you get snubbed by some house mother?
Don't be so flippant, Merriweather. Merely because I happen to take the affairs of this college rather seriously.
Well, we all take them seriously, son. But let's take the long view. In 100 years, after the dust of the last atom bomb is cleared away, nothing we say here today will seem quite worth that long face of yours.
My long face, as you call it, is the result of shouldering my responsibilities and keeping my nose to the grindstone.
That's no grindstone, Clarence. It's my coffee. For Pete's sake, how many things do you drink?
Let me order you some coffee of your own, Mr. Wellman.
Oh, he'd hate it, Doctor. Never touches the stuff.
It happened to be right in front of me.
You'd have found it in a foxhole. Now, go on, Clarence. Finish Dr. Hall's ice cream and tell us your trouble.
Dr. Hall's ice cream? I'm sorry, Doctor. I didn't realize...
No. You're quite welcome to it, Mr. Wellman. Now, was there something you wanted me to do?
Yes, Dr. Hall. It will be necessary for you to address the student body in chapel tomorrow.
Oh?
The Reverend Dr. Gilby is ill, you know.
Oh, I hadn't heard. Nothing serious, I hope?
Oh, I don't think so, Doctor. Just picked up a bug somewhere. By tomorrow, they'll discover a new miracle drug to cure him. By next week, they'll find the new miracle drug makes his ears fall off. You can't read it.
Well, I'm sincerely sorry to hear about Dr. Gilby's illness. And, of course, I'll address chapel tomorrow. Although I haven't not much experience in clerical oratory. Now, if you gentlemen will excuse me...
Oh, sure, Doctor. I think we're all through. This is my lunch, you know.
Oh, thank you.
Why don't you let me take the check for change, Merriweather?
All right.
Waiter. check, please.
Dr. Hall's at a luncheon, Miss Lee, but I'm sure he'll be home very soon if you'd like to wait.
I'm afraid I'd better not, Mrs. Hall. Thank you. My train leaves in an hour. But Dr. Hall has always been so nice to me. He's such a fine man. I thought I owed it to him to explain why I'm leaving Ivy.
Leaving Ivy, Miss Lee? But I thought... Well, aren't you the Margaret Lee who's up for president of the student council?
Was, Mrs. Hall. The field is now open for a new candidate. One with lower marks, possibly, but a higher social standing. Perhaps one whose family is less than 4,000 years old. Oh, Mrs. Hall, my father was so proud of me. And now...
No, please, dear. Sit down. There. Why don't you cry a little? It helps sometimes, you know. Tears are a sort of window washing operation. You see things a little more clearly through the panes.
I've cried myself dry, Mrs. Hall. Some of it was self-pity, I guess, and some of it was... Well, I suppose I just overrated the decency of the student body.
I think it far more likely, my dear, that a few members of it have underrated you. You mustn't condemn an institution because some of its windows rattle. Dr. Hall is going to be very disturbed about this.
Do you know how vicious student politics can be, Mrs. Hall?
Oh, no, I'm afraid I don't, my dear. But if they're anything like backstage politics, which I happen to have known intimately, they can give you a pretty rough time. I've been up against a great deal of snobbery and discrimination myself.
In England, as an English woman, among English people.
Yes, and here, too. In fact, 4 or 5 weeks ago, I wasn't sure that I was welcome at Ivy. Even Dr. Hall was none too certain. But your case cuts a little deeper. I realize that.
You'll never know how deep, Mrs. Hall, I hope. I flattered myself that I'd been accepted, that my scholarship record and my fitness for the presidency would make up for my being an alien, but... Well, the organized ostracism...
Oh, I'm sure, Margaret, that a handful of unthinking...
Don't try, Mrs. Hall. My people have always won by retreating. Maybe I'm making history. I'm retreating without winning. I guess I just didn't realize how well the Exclusion Act was enforced.
I'm afraid I'm not too well equipped to cope with this, Margaret. But I'm sure you know how I feel about it.
I do, Mrs. Hall, and I'm grateful. And please tell Dr. Hall how I appreciate everything he's...
Home is the sailor, home from the sea. Have you, my Popsy, a welcome for me?
Take it, matey. Have a nice luncheon.
Yes, my dear, quite pleasant. Mr. Wellman paid the check.
It's nice of him.
Nice of him. My dear girl, you can't dismiss an announcement of this importance with any such offhand remark. Mr. Wellman paying a luncheon check is as world-shaking as the discovery of the wheel.
You mean Mr. Wellman is tight, Toddy?
Tight is rather a brutal way to express it, Victoria, but I find it charmingly accurate. Mr. Wellman is extremely imminent in the sense of being close. I have heard that he launders his pipe cleaners.
I suppose he got so tremendously rich throwing his money about.
Vicky, darling, Mr. Wellman throwing his money about is a spectacle which Mr. Cecil J. DeMille...
Beef. Cecil B. DeMille, B for bathtub.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yes. Mr. Wellman throwing his money about is a spectacle which Mr. Cecil B. DeMille wouldn't even attempt. When I recall how generous, yes, even spontaneously generous, Mr. Wellman has been with his millions for this school, and how frugal he can be with... Vicky. What's wrong?
Wrong? What do you mean?
Oh, I mean, my dear, that no one can love someone as much as I love you and not be instantly aware of a shadow on that someone's face. Tell me, please.
Oh, Toddy, I wish this hadn't come up. You have so many things to cope with.
What's the matter? Did something happen while I was out at lunch?
Well, not to me, dear. In fact, it has nothing to do with me personally, except that, well, it's disturbing to see any youngster with a broken heart. Do you know a student called Margaret Lee?
No, I don't think so. Wait a moment. Lee. Yes, a very neat and rather frail girl, quite intelligent looking.
That's the one.
Well, of course I know her. Of her, rather. A fine student.
Not anymore, William. She's gone home. I did my best to persuade her to stay and talk to you, but I doubt if even you... Oh, it was really very sad.
Now, my dear, don't distress yourself. This is my problem now. Sit down and tell me about it. Tell me the whole story.
Well, as you know, Margaret Lee came to this country for her education. She chose Ivy. And so
This is a wicked thing, Vicky. The antithesis of everything we have tried to instill in the men and women here at Ivy. I'm sorry that I wasn't here in time to talk to the girl.
I'm afraid I handled it rather badly, William.
February 17th, 1950, the Halls of Ivy here on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. The news from 73 years ago today comes up next, but first, these important words from your favorite radio station. Classic Radio Theater family, you know our friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of your life. He didn't stop by just creating the best pillow. He created the best bed sheets ever. They look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep for me, because, you know, I'm working like 67 hours a day. Now, Mike's offering the best deal on his Giza Dreams bed sheets ever. You can get a set of Giza sheets for as low as $29.98. You'll never want to sleep on anything else once you slept on a set of Giza Dream sheets. A special offer for you right now. You can get a set of Giza sheets for as low as $29.98. Call 1-800-928-4715. Use the promo code Wyatt. Or go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Wyatt. It's good on anything on the website. That number again, 1-800-928-4715. Use my promo code Wyatt. Thanks for tuning in on this Friday to Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox, an episode of the Halls of Ivy as it was broadcast on February 17th, 1950. In the newspapers of that Friday, 75 years ago, these were some of the headlines. President Truman touched off the Democrat Party's 1950 congressional campaign last night by accusing the Republicans of political hypocrisy and scare tactics intended to deceive American voters. He predicted the Republican bid to recapture Congress on the moth-eaten scarecrow of socialism will fail. The Democrats, he said, will triumph with a forward-looking program that offers peace and prosperity to the nation and the world. Operators of the New Jersey Bell Telephone Company yesterday agreed to delay a strike pending report of a state fact-finding panel. But elsewhere, there was no hopeful sign in the nationwide telephone dispute. Fur coat dealers complained to Congress yesterday that they face bankruptcy unless the 20% federal excise tax on furs is repealed or reduced. Spokesman for jewelry, luggage, and toilet article industries likewise urged the House Ways and Means Committee to slash or cancel the wartime tax. The Senate Agriculture Committee voted yesterday in Washington 6-2 to remove all government price supports from Irish potatoes until rigid planting and marketing controls are put into operation. The committee had approved the idea informally Wednesday. Congress still debating the Brannon plan proposed to protect the farmer from the dangers of overproduction and declining prices. Nationalist China's top diplomat in the UN, T.F. Sang, called on the U.S. last night to reconsider its China policy and give moral backing to the nationalists. The nationalists, he said, are not asking Americans to shed their blood on Formosa. Actress Joan Bennett sent columnist Hedda Hopper a skunk as a Valentine gift. Miss Bennett spent $435 on her gift, and she's satisfied, and Miss Hopper expressed her thanks. But back of it's a Hollywood feud resulting from columnist Hopper's criticism of Banks. The skunk, thoughtfully deodorized, delivered by Miss Bennett's chauffeur with Miss Bennett's card. It cost her $35. Full-page ads in 2 Hollywood newspapers cost her $200 each. These 2 ads contain an excerpt from columnist Harry Crocker, which said, "Hollywood is smiling tolerantly at the attack in print by a certain female." Hedda said she'd given the skunk to the James Masons. Hopper saying they've been looking for one for months as a companion for their 9 cats. Seems there's a great affinity between cats and skunks. And those some of the day's top news stories as reported in the newspapers of Friday, February 17th, 1950. On your radio, The Halls of Ivy, which continues now on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox.
She was so depressed and discouraged that, well, I don't know too much about this part of the job. Are campus politics always as bad as this?
No, of course not. But I must say that I sometimes stand aghast at the utter ruthlessness of these young people. Young, of course, is the key word in that admission. They're all children, callously pulling the wings off butterflies. As far as I'm concerned, one of the chief purposes of education, the chief purpose, if you like, is to impart an understanding of the butterfly's viewpoint. Whenever I hear of a student being made the victim of prejudice, I feel that I have failed in some... Yes, Penny?
Beg pardon, sir, but there was a message from the Reverend Gilby. Seems like he was took sick, sir, and wanted to know if you could...
Yes, I know. I received the message at lunch, Penny. Thank you.
I've got a Bible, sir, if you'd care to borrow it.
I have a Bible, Penny. Thank you.
Quite welcome, sir. Any time at all.
Well, it's turning out to be quite a day. What was that all about?
Well, Dr. Gilby, the chaplain, is ill. I am pinch-hitting for him, if that isn't too irreverent a word, in chapel tomorrow morning. Vicky, I don't want you to come. I feel I should be very inadequate.
Oh, nonsense, Toddy. You'll do a lovely performance. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if you were held over for a second week.
Held over, Victoria, is not very good ecclesiastical terminology.
Yeah, I know. I love Dr. Gilby, and he has everybody with him from the Te Deum to the recessional. But you'll be wonderful, too. Did you ever hear Charles Lawton give a Bible reading?
No, and I must say it sounds quite unexpected.
Unexpected, but intensely interesting. And funny, too. In fact, it inspired me to do a great deal more Bible reading.
Well, I'm afraid I haven't Mr. Lawton's elocutionary gifts. But if Captain Bligh can do it without the congregation resorting to mutiny, maybe Dr. Christian Hall can rely on the students' bounty of generosity. I say, that was rather good, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. It was splendid. Just go on like that and you'll wow them.
73 years ago, February 17th, 1950, the Halls of Ivy here on this Friday Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Amos and Andy on Saturday's Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox from February 18th, 1951. Sapphire thinks the Kingfish is interested in a Lonely Hearts Club. It seems that he's not. He just wants the best in town. He just doesn't know what the best in town is. You'll hear about that on tomorrow's Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. But now, the conclusion of the Halls of Ivy. 73 years ago, February 17th, 1950.
That surround us here today.
As we return to Ivy, we find a perturbed Dr. Hall striding back and forth in the living room, as Mrs. Hall says.
Toddy, stop pacing. Break into a trot or a single foot or a gallop. Or better still, sit down here with me.
Oh, I'm a little restless, Victoria. That matter of the Lee girl. You know, I went to the station to find her. I thought I might be able to persuade her to reconsider, but I was too late.
I'm awfully sorry. I'm sure you could have done something. You're very persuasive, you know.
Then I wired her aboard the train. But not knowing what space she was occupying, I wasn't any too...
It's the telephone.
I know, I hear it, but where is it? I'm going to put that extension cord on a deep-sea fishing reel with a strong string.
Well, it's right near me somewhere. Oh, here, under the evening paper.
Thank you. Dr. Hall's residence... Spokane, Washington?
Good heavens, the Lee girl must have taken a very fast train.
Yes, put him on, please. Hello, Frederick? Yes, I am indeed. Now, are you ready? Rook to the King's Bishops 3. Check. How do you like them apples, Frederick? Goodbye. Poor old Frederick. Lost both nights last September and can't get his queen out.
Oh, don't these long-distance chess games run up some pretty fancy telephone bills?
Oh, not for me, my love. You'll notice that I always receive the calls. I never initiate. I only play cross-country chess with those of my professional acquaintances who are equipped to finance them, and at their invitation. Oh, I'm no Reshevsky, but playing 20 simultaneous games blindfolded, but I'm pretty good.
I didn't know there were any college professors who could afford that sort of playing.
Oh, there are a few. Pitifully few, I must admit. You know the ones who have written cloak and sword novels for Hollywood, under assumed names, of course. And the unmarried ones who prefer to spend their budgets playing chess by phone rather than go night clubbing.
You gave up a lot of things to marry me, too, didn't you?
I certainly did, my darling. Bad meals, dull evenings, risky encounters with emotional undergraduates, and a growing certainty that life was passing me by. Like poor old Frederick in Spokane, without a queen, I was playing a losing game.
Well, Toddy, you're so dependable, particularly when it comes to giving a wife the right answers.
I think one of the reasons I fell so deeply, and so permanently, in love with you, Vicky, was because you asked the kind of questions I was able to answer.
Oh, one of the reasons I loved you, Toddy, was that if you didn't know the answers, you made them up. But didn't happen many times.
You've a very gracious memory, my sweet. You asked a million questions I was unable to answer. Remember the evening by the sea at Brighton? With the full moon across the water and dance music from the hotel, battling the elements to be heard.
It's been a lovely evening, William. I remember it for long, long. I remember it always.
You won't have to make any effort toward it, Victoria. I'll be reminding you. By mail, by cable, by... Is there such a thing as a carrier seagull?
Well, if there isn't, I'll train a few. Has anyone ever had a pet seagull?
I don't know, my dear. But if I were a seagull and you wanted me for a pet, I'm sure I... Did you shiver? Are you cold?
I've never been warmer. I was just shaking off the thought that we'd ever have to communicate with each other by mail or cable or seagull. Tell me, doesn't a sabbatical ever stretch?
Only when one has wealthy relatives and a disregard for one's job, Vicky. And I have neither. My sabbatical stretches only into next week.
It seems only a week since it started. For us, I mean.
Oh, it started earlier for me. It started when I bought one ticket to give them tears. Because I didn't know where else to go for the evening.
I think I knew you were there, even then.
No, you didn't. That was the night the man who played the vicar had such a cold that you were reading all his lines. You were too busy.
Whatever made you come back?
I haven't the faintest idea.
Not the faintest?
Oh, well, possibly. It was because I just happened to think that you were the most delightful, the most charming, the most enchanting, the most...
Go on.
Go on.
Oh, is that all? I wish you'd come backstage after the first time you saw the play, William, instead of the 27th. It's too bad we can't reach around in time and snatch back a few lost weeks, isn't it?
It's not completely lost, my dear. I saw you almost every night and dreamed of you every day. I was on my way to becoming the traditional absent-minded professor instead of the most timid one. Oh, Vicky, my dear, I am so very fond of you.
And I'm very fond of you, William. In fact, I'm very fond of everything tonight. Life and the sea and the moon and the... Professor, why is the moon always associated with lovers?
Well, considering that I have been in love for such a short time, my dear, I'm rather ill-equipped to answer that question. But, unless I'm wrong, the moon was once part of this earth. And I suppose that lovers are really a little bit apart of each other. They share an orbit of their own.
It's strange, isn't it? That the moon has been shared by millions of lovers and is still on an exclusive basis with all of them. It's our moon, isn't it, William?
Yes. I filed our claim this morning with the Royal Astronomical Society in London.
Good.
I also claimed a proprietary interest in every seventh wave, every fifth seagull.
Beg pardon, sir, it's 10 o'clock.
Listen to them, Victoria. Even the seagulls sound human tonight.
Sir?
I could swear that one of them spoke to me.
Honey, darling, Penny is speaking to you.
Penny? Do seagulls have Penny? Oh, Penny. I was thinking of something else. What is it, Penny?
10 o'clock, sir. You said to let you know, and it was 10 o'clock. On account of you wanted to get to bed early, on account of you was going to talk in chapel tomorrow, and on...
Yes, Penny, so he did.
Thank you, Penny. Good night.
Good night, sir. Good night, Mum.
Toddy, you were 1,000,000 miles away.
238,857 to be exact. Curious, isn't it, Vicky, that so much has been said about the man in the moon, and so little about the moon in a man.
Darling, what are you talking about?
Oh, just a brief planetary excursion. Speaking of which, if I am to star in chapel tomorrow, I must get some sleep.
Is your routine set?
Victoria, you make me sound like a trained seal.
I'm sorry, darling. Do you know what you're going to say?
Well, I know my text, but I guess the sermon will have to, sort of come out its own way.
You're going to talk about Margaret Lee.
Yes, I am.
I don't believe Dr. Gilby would have done that.
I don't think it's quite as much his problem as mine. But his chapel is a house of truth, and I'm going to tell the truth about Margaret Lee.
Good for you. Now get some sleep so you look absolutely dreamy in the morning.
Well, now, Victoria.
And I'll be in the third row centre right across the aisle from the critics. Oh, Toddy, I can hardly wait.
Wait? For what, my dear?
For the papers. I'm dying to read your notices.
Good morning. I am glad to report that Dr. Gilby is not seriously ill and should be with you again tomorrow. I welcome this opportunity to call to your attention a situation which has arisen here at Ivy. And since it concerns a matter of faith, there could be no better place to speak of it than in this chapel. And no better time for it than on the eve of National Brotherhood Week, proclaimed by our president throughout the nation. A young woman, a brilliant student, with such a record of achievement and reputation for integrity that she was an outstanding candidate for the highest office within the gift of the undergraduate body. This young woman has left Ivy and returned to her home. Against unfair student politics, snobbery, and racial prejudice, she fought a good fight and thought she had lost. In her conception and practice of decent human behavior, she has shown, I believe, no lack. Therefore, she does not leave here the poorer. Rather is it some of you who have found wanting. And by the same token, I, too, must have a sense of failure. Tolerance is a word I would rather not use. It seems to indicate a condescension. I prefer the word understanding. And intelligent understanding is as essential to our study of human relationship as it is to our comprehension of Latin or science. We must learn not only the meaning of democracy, but its application and practice. Or in after years, our boast of a superior way of life will be a sham, and Ivy College will have failed in its primary function, a preparation for life. I would like now to inform you that I have been in communication with this young lady, and she is returning to school. I hope I may rely on the student body to conduct the forthcoming election for president of the council on a basis of merit untinged by social bias, so that her faith in us will be restored. Ladies and gentlemen of Ivy, the human race is not an exclusive club with a selective membership. We are all members from birth. True, it has both active and associate members, and it is up to each of us to provide our own classification. But I consider it one of the most important functions of education, so to instruct you in the humanities, that when your membership in this human society is ended, the recording secretary may mark you paid in full.
I was curious. I tasted it. Now I know why Schlitz is the beer that made Milwaukee famous.
And here again are Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Coleman.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
We'll be seeing you next week at this time at the Halls of Ivy, starring Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Coleman. The other players were Barbara Jean Wong, Gloria Gordon, Herb Butterfield, and Willard Waterman. Tonight's script was written by Don Quinn and Walter Brown Newman. Our music was composed and conducted by Henry Russell. The Halls of Ivy was created by Don Quinn, directed by Nat Wolfe, and presented by the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Ken Carpenter speaking.
Oh, we love the halls of ivy that surround us here today, and we will not forget, though we be far, far away.
From 73 years ago, February 17th, 1950, the Halls of Ivy here on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Thanks for making us a part of your day. Visit our webpage, classicradio.stream. Stream our shows on demand. You don't have to miss a single episode. We do 21 hours a week. You can stream our shows, learn more about building a classic radio collection of your own. You can contact me there, find our social media links, and if you'd like to support our program, you can buy me a copy. That Buy Me a Coffee money goes toward helping us maintain our distribution channels and also goes toward making certain that we can acquire additional classic radio collections. That's at classicradio.stream. Thanks for tuning in. Thank this station, support their advertisers, and tell all your friends the greatest radio shows of all time are right here at this spot on the dial. Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite radio station.